Hi there, my name is Tim Phillips and I work for Cambridge Consultants as part of their medical device development team, where we're involved in the development of complex surgical systems, including next generation surgical robots. And today I'd like to focus on something that we think is particularly important for complex systems like medical robots, and especially those which include autonomous features, and that's how to manage safety effectively. So a bit about me and my background. I'm a human factors engineer. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, it's my job to understand the relationship between humans and the products and the systems that they interact with. And my discipline kind of sits at the intersection between design engineering and psychology. And when working on a development, it's my job to optimize the system to complement the needs and capabilities of users, reduce risk, and maximize safety. So consider for a moment a relatively basic consumer device, like a microwave. A mismatch between the device and the user, for example, a misunderstanding of the user interface, would, in a worst case, result in annoyance or maybe an overly cold or hot meal. So that's a reasonably benign outcome, but I'm sure we've all experienced frustration with products and interfaces like this, which suggests that even for the simple things, we can still get the design wrong. And even if technically the microwave all worked correctly, things can still go wrong because of use-related issues. Now let's consider a more complex system with a different use case, a surgical robotic system. How could this go wrong? Well, I'm sure we can think of a myriad of different outcomes. But again, even if the system operated 100% properly from a technical perspective, i.e. there's zero faults, there's still massive potential for use-related errors. And a mismatch between the system and the user in this scenario could result in serious and immediate harm to a patient. So human factors activities are conducted as part of a larger development program and run concurrently with the design activities. And the human factors risk-based activities are done in parallel with technical risk management. Repeated loops of testing, evaluation, and revision are done until a sufficiently high level of safety is achieved. Medical development, therefore, is half design, as you can see here in orange, and half risk management, as you can see in blue, and the two are inseparably linked. Now, each of these is a relevant standard to ensure quality. ISO 14971 covers all risk management activities for medical products, particularly those technical risks, and IEC 62366 and the FDA's human factors guidance focus specifically on the human factors risks and the risk management process. So as a risk-based approach, the focus of human factors and what those regulatory bodies really care about are: one, safety. Are the use-related risks adequately managed? And two, effectiveness. Can users operate the system effectively to achieve the desired outcomes? And does it achieve its purpose in the hands of a user? So why am I talking about this specifically in relation to robotic autonomy? Well, it's because autonomous systems can actually magnify use-related risks. Now that might seem counterintuitive because a core value proposition of autonomous surgical systems is that they have increased safety potential. There's no point in building a next generation surgical robot if it's not at least as safe as current systems, and ideally more so. And theoretically, you would imagine that removing the variability of the human element and replacing it with the predictability and accuracy of a machine that doesn't fatigue would be safer. But safety is not an emergent property of a system that occurs spontaneously. It requires careful thought and design. And we believe that this is particularly pertinent as we transition to the middle tiers of autonomy and enter the muddy waters of a hybrid system where some processes are autonomous and others aren't, and there can be this uncertainty as in whose responsibility it is to manage risk in these processes. Is it the machine or is it the human? So if the use-related issues aren't resolved, then the increased safety potential of surgical autonomous systems won't be realized, and moreover, safety may in fact reduce, not increase. So as an example of a hybrid system, consider a self-driving vehicle. And for a moment, just put any preconceptions or prejudices you have about that technology to one side. In the case of full self-driving, the roles and responsibilities of each party are pretty well understood. But in the cases of level 2 or level 3 autonomy, they're perhaps a little less implicit and may introduce new types of risk. This can lead to lapsed concentration, confusion, or negligence, meaning no party is sufficiently in control. And if in this scenario, one example of a human factors issue is if the user's role is merely supervisory, are they actually receiving sufficient stimulation in order to perform at an optimum level? So you can see here the Yerkes-Dodson law, which shows user response for different levels of stimulation. And if the answer to that question is no, and this is an issue, then the task or the user's roles may need to be redefined or parts of the system redesigned. So as we transition from fully manual processes to autonomous ones, we need to consider a wider range of risks and have strategies for safety thinking, i.e., how are we approaching the problem of safety? So I now want to give you a very brief insight into some tools we've used for managing risks through the product development cycle, which fit within this ISO 14971 and 62366 framework of risk management. And in our experience of doing complex system development, we tend to find that new risks are introduced late in the development timeline through changes, feature creep, or trade-offs, and so it's useful to have a way to analyze those quickly and efficiently. Now, there are different ways for evaluating risks. Firstly, we have what we call bottom-up methodologies. For example, failure modes and effects analysis, which is arguably the most commonly used tool by medical product developers and is advocated in the standards. This considers the ramifications of system failures at a component and subtask level, i.e. a very granular level, and then considers how those failure modes or harms can be avoided through specific design mitigations. And then we have top-down methodologies, for example, fault tree analysis or hazard analysis. These consider the scope of harms or outcomes that could occur in your system, and then work backwards to explore the causes. And the primary benefit of this type of analysis is that it provides a more holistic oversight of your system. But how do we capture the mitigations from top-down evaluations? Well, we would argue that you need a way of documenting and maintaining outputs from these evaluations in an easy to understand and executable format. And paying attention at this point in development can help you significantly further down the line, particularly when those design changes or trade-offs are being proposed. And we find the best way for doing this is something called a safety assurance case, in which your safety logic becomes structured. So what exactly is a safety assurance case and why should you use it? Well, essentially, it's a document providing the theoretical basis for why your system will be safe, built on the understanding gained from your risk evaluations. You state the logic behind your system's architecture and then create principles which are the safety tenets of your system. If your design conforms to these tenets and your logic is good, then theoretically your system will be safe. And this is an approach advocated by the FDA, but only mandated in a small number of cases. However, we found that it's more broadly applicable and helpful in low to medium level autonomous robotic systems. And the real benefit of doing it this way is that it helps to sanity check your design decisions, particularly those which occur in the later stages of development. And it's also helpful when transitioning from a concept stage into a full product development, as it acts as a kind of stake in the ground of what your system is and how it needs to be structured. So let's quickly consider an example. Imagining that you're developing a laparoscopic multi-arm telerobotic system, which is a bare bones system with minimal levels of automation. And you've completed your early risk analysis and identified some key risks and suitable mitigations. Now imagine there's some commercial impetus to add guided tool insertion, where the robot sends a new tool to the exact position where the surgeon was last working at the single press of a button. Here you're moving from a total direct drive, essentially level 0 autonomy system, where the surgeon controls all the motions, to a semi-autonomous system around level 1 or 2, where the robot is in control of certain motions. If you only use bottom-up methodologies to analyze this, for example, failure modes and effects analysis, it's possible and even somewhat likely that you miss a failure mode or don't consider the full gamut of system issues and their knock-on implications. Instead, the use of safety principles from a safety assurance case is very helpful for sanity checking proposals like this. So here's just a few examples of safety principles you may have created for your original level 0 autonomy system. In reality, you might have 10 to 15 design and human factors related principles, dependent upon the complexity or autonomy level of the system, but ideally as few as possible to encompass all hazards in a clear and concise way. These principles are the risk mitigation cornerstones of your development. However, they don't negate any specific component level mitigations you might define from a bottom-up approach, but should be complementary to them. And again, if your design adheres to these safety principles, there's a constructive, logical argument for your system being safe. So let's look to see whether the guided tool insertion proposal adheres to these safety principles. So firstly, no motion without direct user input. Well, the proposal is for an autonomous motion at the push of a button. So between pressing that button and the arrival of the robot at its intended location, there's this autonomous, non-user controlled motion. And although the surgeon has requested the process, it's not being directly controlled and therefore contravenes this principle. But that doesn't mean that the intent of the value proposition of the feature can't still be worked out. There may be solutions to overcome these issues. For example, the surgeon's assistant could apply a direct and continual force to the arm of the robot. The robot could detect that force, move, and apply a software depth guard to prevent over-insertion. Principle 2, no motion without surgeon supervision. So during transition from point A to point B, the whole motion needs to be supervised in real time. And again, this doesn't mean that we can't necessarily do such a feature, we just need to think carefully about its implementation. We need to ensure the surgeon and the robotic assistant are focused at all times. So there may need to be surgeon engagement checks, for example, eye tracking or a dead man's handle, and we need to ensure that the surgeon and robotic assistant are receiving the true picture of events. Therefore, all the screens must be running correctly, meaning they're controlled by safety critical software. And number 3, the system state must always be accurately communicated. So how does the user know that they're in normal or guided tool insertion mode? If misinterpreted, they risk slamming the tool into body tissue through over-insertion. And so a potential solution would be to include state feedback on both the surgeon's console and also on the robotic arms. And perhaps also include a mode selection button on the arms so that the users must actively engage guided tool insertion mode. So in summary, 3 key points that I'd like you to take away today. Firstly, automation brings with it a range of human factors issues and can actually introduce new types of risk, meaning autonomous systems are particularly challenging from a safety perspective. Number 2, we find the use of top-down and bottom-up methodologies to be necessary for achieving safety. And number 3, in our experience, documenting the safety approach with safety principles is particularly useful, especially in the later stages of product development when changes or trade-offs are being proposed. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If you'd like to know more, please contact me or Cambridge Consultants, and we'd be happy to tell you more.